The first letter showed up on a Thursday, taped to my front door like some kind of eviction notice from a sheriff's office. It was printed on cheap paper with a self-important logo that read, Meadowbrook Ridge HOA Notice of Violation and Eviction Proceedings. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. My name's Griffin Boone. I'm a 53-year-old land surveyor turned semi-retired property investor. I bought the entire cul-de-sac of Meadowbrook Ridge 7 years ago at a foreclosure auction. Every single lot. All 13 houses. I lease 10 out, live in one, and use the other 2 for short-term rentals. So when this so-called HOA claimed I had 90 days to vacate the premises or face legal consequences, I knew something stank worse than the sewage backup in Lot 3 last summer. The ringleader of this circus, a middle-aged woman named Amanda McKinney. Platinum blonde bob, tennis skirts every day of the week, and a voice like a blender full of gravel. She showed up on my porch the very next morning, flanked by 2 other wannabe authority figures, some guy with a clipboard named Trevor, and a woman named Denise who wore a neck brace even though I'd seen her running last weekend. Amanda didn't even knock. She just jabbed her acrylic nail against my Ring camera and shouted, "Mr. Boone, this is your final warning. The HOA has voted. You are in flagrant violation of our covenants and bylaws." I opened the door slowly, holding my mug like I had all the time in the world. "Amanda, I own this land. All of it. You're standing on my porch, on my lot, on my street." She scoffed, like I'd insulted her fake pearls. "Griffin, just because you think you own the property doesn't mean you're above Meadowbrook Ridge standards. You're in breach of Code 3.1 improper yard maintenance. And your tenant on Lot 7 has a commercial vehicle. That's strictly forbidden." Trevor nodded like he understood law. "We've already sent notices. This is your last opportunity to comply," I grinned. "And I'm giving you your last opportunity to get off my property before I call the sheriff." Amanda crossed her arms, clearly trying to look intimidating. "We have the authority to remove you. The board voted unanimously." I stepped forward. "Amanda, there is no legal HOA here. The original dissolved in 2015. You can't just slap together a fake board and start evicting people from land you don't own." She didn't blink. "We reformed it. We had enough signatures." "You had signatures from tenants. Tenants don't get to form HOAs. And guess who owns every lot here?" Her lips twitched. "You're bluffing." I went back inside, came out with a thick folder and dropped it onto my porch table. Inside were title deeds, tax records, and the original HOA dissolution document, all notarized, all legal. Amanda stared at it like it was written in another language. "We'll see about this," she hissed. "You've been warned." Then she turned on her Skechers and marched off like she owned the place, but I knew better because I did. The first real escalation came the following Tuesday, just after sunrise. I was in the garage swapping out a carburetor on my '72 El Camino when I heard the unmistakable grind of construction equipment. I walked out to the street, wiping grease off my hands, and there it was, a rented Bobcat loader scraping up the edge of the main road, tearing into the curbside like it had a vendetta against concrete. Behind it stood Amanda, arms crossed behind her back like a general surveying her troops. She barked something to the operator, a lanky kid in a neon vest who clearly had no clue what he'd been dragged into. I didn't need to ask what was happening. I'd seen enough HOA land grabs to recognize it. They were trying to build a gate, a literal iron gate across the entry of the cul-de-sac. Right across my private road, I walked up behind her slowly. "You planning to ask the owner before you turn his street into a medieval checkpoint?" Amanda turned, her expression smug. "This is necessary for community safety. We've had reports of unauthorized vehicles." The board approved installation of a security gate. The board doesn't own the land. We have a right to protect our neighborhood. The easement allows for reasonable improvements. "There is no easement. This isn't public access. You're on a privately platted road that's recorded under my LLC. You're trespassing, Amanda. We voted. The board has authority. You're about to have a lawsuit instead." She looked over her shoulder and signaled to Denise, who was standing beside a folding table topped with clipboards and a box of yard signs. "Griffin," Amanda said, "the community wants this. You're the only one standing in the way." I stepped closer, dropping my voice. "You're orchestrating unauthorized construction on private property. You're endangering your little operation." Amanda didn't respond. Instead, she spun on her heel and walked straight to a man in a gray suit who just stepped out of a black sedan. He looked like every bottom-feeder real estate attorney I'd ever run into: slicked hair, too much cologne, and a briefcase that probably hadn't carried anything but paper threats in years. He introduced himself as legal counsel for Meadowbrook Ridge HOA. I didn't shake his hand. "You're building an unauthorized structure on land you have no legal claim to," I said. "I hope you've got liability insurance." He gave me a thin smile. "My clients believe they have an enforceable right to make improvements for the safety of residents. You'll find this is a common provision in community governance. Your clients don't own the property, and they're not a registered HOA under Texas law," I said. "Check the county records. There's no governance filing, no CCRs with legal standing. You're representing a ghost." He handed me a cease and desist letter like that was supposed to scare me. I took it, glanced at the boilerplate nonsense, and said nothing. Instead, I walked back to my truck, grabbed my phone, and called Deputy Sandoval at the county sheriff's office. The loader was still chewing up the road when the black and gold cruiser rolled in 15 minutes later. Deputy Sandoval stepped out, took one look at the concrete mess, and let out a slow whistle. "Boone," he said, "you want to explain why there's a construction crew demolishing your road?" I handed him the letter. "Unauthorized construction. They're claiming HOA authority. None exists," Amanda rushed over. "Officer, we've filed the proper documentation. This is a necessary improvement." "We're protecting our residents." Sandoval raised an eyebrow. "Filed with who?" "With the board. We held a vote." "Did you file a construction permit with the county?" She hesitated. "We didn't think one was required for minor adjustments." "It's just a gate." Sandoval turned to the Bobcat operator. "Cut the engine, now." The kid shut it down immediately. The silence that followed was delicious. "I'm going to need to see identification and a work order from whoever contracted this job," Sandoval said. "And if there's damage to private property, we'll be treating this as criminal mischief." Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. Denise stepped forward, waving a clipboard. "These are community petitions. We had support." "Petitions don't override land ownership," Sandoval replied. "You're not a governing body. You're a neighborhood club with delusions of power." The crew packed up within the hour. The Bobcat was hauled off, the folding table disappeared, and Amanda's little army scattered like roaches. The best part? Sandoval took statements and photos. I saw him jotting down unlawful construction and trespassing in his report, but Amanda wasn't finished. The next morning, I received an urgent call from one of my tenants on Lot 5. His water had been shut off. No warning. No notice. I drove over and found a padlock on the valve box. A bright orange sticker had been slapped over it. "Service suspended by HOA non-compliance pending resolution." I called the utility company. They confirmed what I already suspected: they hadn't touched it. Someone had installed a lock themselves. That was sabotage. I filed a police report immediately. Then I called a locksmith and had every padlock on the cul-de-sac replaced with coded ones linked to my security network. I also installed trail cams at every utility access point. I wasn't about to let these lunatics tamper with infrastructure again. That same evening, I filed a restraining order request against Amanda, Denise, and Trevor. I included the police report, the utility sabotage photos, and a copy of the forged cease and desist letter. I also sent copies to the district attorney's office with a formal complaint about fraudulent misrepresentation of authority. By Friday, the sheriff's office had issued a warning to Amanda, not an arrest yet, but enough to rattle her cage. She was told in no uncertain terms that any future interference with utility access or construction on my land would lead to criminal charges. She retaliated by trying to hold a community meeting in the park at the edge of the cul-de-sac. I watched from my porch as she set up folding chairs and passed out pamphlets labeled Emergency HOA Reorganization. I walked over, pulled out my phone, and asked, "Did you file a permit for this assembly?" Amanda narrowed her eyes. "It's a private gathering on public parkland, which requires a permit for groups over 10. You've got 20, one of the attendees stood up. "Wait, is that true?" I nodded. "You can check with the city permit office. I already did." Within 20 minutes, a city parks officer arrived and shut the whole thing down. Amanda fumed as her supporters filtered out, some of them clearly annoyed they'd been misled again. That night, I filed paperwork with the county clerk to formally reassert exclusive development rights for the subdivision. I'd let the previous HOA's paperwork dissolve quietly years ago, but now it was time to make things airtight. I submitted a new declaration, one that explicitly stated that no HOA could be formed without the unanimous consent of all property owners. Since I owned every lot, that meant me. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. Amanda had tried to play queen of a kingdom she didn't own. Now she was going to learn what happened when you challenged the actual landlord. By the following Monday, I'd heard whispers. One of my long-term tenants, a quiet guy named Roll who worked swing shifts at the refinery, mentioned a clipboard had been passed around during the day while he was sleeping. When he asked what it was, a woman he didn't recognize told him it was a confirmation of support for the board's emergency action. She wouldn't let him read it, just told him to sign if he didn't want to get kicked out. That was all I needed to hear. I called my real estate attorney, Miss Patel, the sharpest mind in the county when it came to land use law. By the end of the day, we drafted a cease and desist letter specifically targeting Amanda's group for fraudulent misrepresentation and coercion of tenants. The language was precise. Any further collection of signatures under false pretenses would be treated as attempted fraud, and we'd pursue both civil and criminal charges. But the real break came 2 days later when I got a call from a woman named Carla who lived in one of the short-term rental homes I owned. She was staying there while relocating from out of state, and she sounded nervous. "These people came to my porch last night, 2 women and a man. They said they were with the housing board and needed access to the property to inspect for lease violations. I told them I wasn't comfortable with that, and then they started taking pictures through the window." I felt my jaw clench. "Did you get any names?" "They gave me a card," she said. "It just says Meadowbrook Compliance Division, no phone number, just an email and a seal that looks fake." She texted me a photo of the card. The address on it didn't even exist. The seal looked like it had been copied from a clip art website. But the email domain matched the HOA's supposed website, a site Amanda had launched just a week ago, filled with vague promises about restoring order and reclaiming neighborhood pride. I forwarded everything to Miss Patel and called the sheriff's office again. This wasn't just trespassing anymore, this was impersonation of a regulatory agency. Deputy Sandoval swung by that evening with a plainclothes detective named Rivas. While they gathered statements from Carla, I pulled up the trail cam footage from the rental's porch. The 3 visitors were clearly visible: Amanda, Denise, and a third man I hadn't seen before, mid-40s, fit, wearing a polo shirt that said Community Enforcement. Rivas froze the frame and leaned in. "That guy works private security. He's not licensed for residential enforcement in this county. If they paid him to pose as code enforcement, that's criminal impersonation." It got worse. Rivas cross-checked the email domain from the card and found it had been registered under an alias using a VPN routed through Panama. That tipped the scales. The sheriff's office opened a formal investigation into Amanda's group for fraud, misrepresentation, and harassment. The next morning, detectives served a search warrant on Amanda's house. I watched from my front window as unmarked cars rolled up and plainclothes officers stepped out. Within minutes, they were hauling out file boxes, a laptop, and a desktop tower. Amanda stood on her porch in a bathrobe, yelling about constitutional rights and deep state harassment. No one paid her mind. By noon, the news had broken. Local Channel 8 ran a segment titled, "Fake HOA Faces Legal Trouble After Alleged Fraud Scheme in Meadowbrook Ridge." They interviewed Roll, Carla, and even the utility company rep who'd confirmed the tampering. The story went viral in our county's real estate Facebook groups. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. But Amanda wasn't wired for surrender. 3 days later, I woke up to find my mailbox smashed. Not with a bat, no, that would have been too subtle. Someone had driven a vehicle into it, hard enough to leave tire tracks in the grass and shatter the concrete footing. I checked the camera footage. A minivan, plates covered, driver wearing a hoodie and gloves. I filed a report, but I already knew they wouldn't catch the driver. That wasn't the point. Amanda was lashing out. Her little empire was crumbling and she wanted to send a message, so I sent one back. I filed suit in district court for damages, naming Amanda, Denise, and the fake compliance division as defendants. I included affidavits from tenants, the cease and desist warnings, police reports, and even a notarized copy of the original HOA dissolution. Ms. Patel added claims for tortious interference, defamation, and malicious misrepresentation. But what really put the nail in Amanda's coffin was the financial audit. Remember that fake HOA website she built? Turns out it had a donate button, and people had donated. Over $9,000, according to the payment processor subpoenaed by the sheriff's office. That money wasn't in any official account. It had been transferred directly to Amanda's personal checking account over the course of 2 weeks. That meant wire fraud. Detectives arrested her on a Friday morning. She was led out of her house in handcuffs, barefoot, her bathrobe flapping in the wind as reporters swarmed the front lawn. Denise tried to block the cameras with a patio umbrella, but it only made the footage more ridiculous. The man in the community enforcement shirt was arrested later that day on charges of impersonating a public official and unauthorized security operations. The trial was fast-tracked thanks to the mountain of evidence. Amanda tried to argue that she believed she was doing what was best for the community, but the judge wasn't buying it. Especially not after seeing the donation records, the forged documents, and the security footage of her trying to enter homes under false pretenses. She took a plea deal, 18 months probation, a $5,000 fine, and a court order barring her from holding any leadership role in a residential association for 10 years. Denise got community service. The security guy lost his license, but my favorite part. The court ordered all of Amanda's fraudulent HOA materials, signs, cards, websites, even the stupid fake seal to be destroyed or permanently deleted. I watched as a county tech officer wiped her hard drives and physically shredded the signs in my driveway. After that, I held a block party. Real music, real food, real neighbors, no clipboards, no fake bylaws. People brought lawn chairs and coolers, roll grilled ribs. Carla brought a homemade peach cobbler that vanished in 10 minutes. Even Deputy Sandoval dropped by to say hello. I stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, sipping a shiner, and took it all in. The street was mine again. Not just legally, spiritually. Amanda had tried to rule a kingdom without a crown, and she'd been exposed as nothing more than a petty tyrant with a printer and a grudge. And now, Meadowbrook Ridge was finally what I'd always intended it to be, a community. Not a courtroom. 2 weeks after Amanda's sentencing, the neighborhood finally settled into something resembling normal. For the first time since this whole circus started, I could walk my own property without seeing someone measuring my grass or pretending to inspect my recycling bins. But the damage they caused hadn't surfaced entirely, not yet. It started with a call from my insurance adjuster. He was reviewing a claim I'd filed months earlier, back when Amanda tried to dig up the curb for the gate installation. The city had fined me after a complaint was mysteriously filed claiming I'd approved unauthorized modifications to public right-of-way. I'd submitted evidence that I hadn't been responsible and the fine had been put on hold. Now, the adjuster had a question. "Griffin, do you have any idea why someone named Trevor Ellis filed a notarized addendum to your property's development plan with the county clerk's office back in March?" I leaned forward in my chair. "An addendum." It was submitted under the Meadowbrook Ridge Homeowners Association, listing him as acting secretary. It claims that the HOA had been granted co-ownership rights over common spaces and right-of-way easements. I could feel my pulse in my jaw. That's not just forged. That's a crime. Yep, and it triggered a secondary clause in your policy. You might want to take a look. I drove straight to the county records office. The clerk behind the counter pulled up the file, fumbled through a manila folder and laid it out. It was official looking, I'll give him that. Stamped, signed, even had a fake notary seal. It described shared maintenance authority over sidewalks, utility easements, and curb access for the Meadowbrook Ridge Community Board. It had been slipped in quietly, just weeks before Amanda started her campaign, and worst of all, because it had been on file, even fraudulently, it had triggered a lien against 2 of the rental homes I owned on the block. The title company had flagged it during a tenant refinancing process, putting everything on hold. They hadn't just been playing pretend with flyers and fake meetings. They'd forged legal documents. They were trying to take real control. I called Miss Patel. "We need to escalate," I said. "This isn't just misrepresentation. They tried to alter property rights through forged filings." She didn't hesitate. "We'll file a motion to vacate the fraudulent addendum and pursue criminal charges. I'll contact the notary licensing board too." While she got to work, I contacted the tenants in the affected houses. One of them, a nurse named Jeline, had received a letter in May from the so-called HOA warning her about non-conforming window treatments. She'd ignored it, but now it made sense. They were laying the groundwork for enforcement of rights they didn't actually have. The mail fraud charge alone was enough to bring the feds into the picture. When the district attorney's office saw the depth of the forged filing, they realized this wasn't just a local nuisance anymore. A federal investigator was assigned to work alongside the county prosecutor. They verified that the notary seal used on the document belonged to a woman who died 2 years earlier. Trevor had scanned and copied an old notary stamp from one of Amanda's deceased relative's storage boxes. That crossed the line from civil nonsense into full-scale felony. The federal investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Agent Lafferty, came to my house in an unmarked SUV. She wore jeans and a windbreaker and walked like someone who'd broken down doors before breakfast. "I've seen HOA scams before," she said, flipping through her notebook, "but I've never seen one this elaborate. They forged a land use document, used a dead notary's seal, and attempted to assume co-ownership of real property they had no stake in. They tried to evict me from land I own outright," I said. "They even shut off a tenant's water." "You've got a real racketeering case here," she replied. "If we can prove they collected money while impersonating a governing body and used that authority to alter legal filings, this becomes wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. We're going to seize everything connected to it." Within a week, subpoenas landed on Amanda's and Trevor's bank accounts. Denise was served a warrant for her laptop, which had been used to draft the fake documents. A grand jury was convened to hear the case. The feds weren't just looking for restitution, they wanted prison time. I testified under oath, presenting everything: the forged addendum, the emails, the security footage, the donation records, and the timeline of Amanda's rise to fake power. Agent Lafferty stood beside me, flipping through slide after slide. The jury didn't deliberate long. Trevor Ellis was arrested first. He was at a golf course just outside the county line, apparently trying to network his way into a new HOA board gig in another subdivision. The feds seized his laptop, tablet, and a thumb drive that contained drafts of several other fake filings for different neighborhoods. He'd been planning to replicate the scam elsewhere. Amanda's arrest came later that evening. This time, she didn't get the quiet dignity of a county detective. She was picked up by federal marshals in a grocery store parking lot while arguing with a cashier about expired coupons. Her mugshot made the news, again, but this time the charges weren't misdemeanors or probation-eligible offenses. They were federal: conspiracy, wire fraud, attempted theft of property through fraudulent recording, forgery of a government seal. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. "You weaponized bureaucracy to manipulate an entire neighborhood," he said. "You filed fraudulent legal documents with the intent to seize control of property you had no right to. You lied to tenants, forged signatures, and used a dead woman's identity to prop up your scam." Trevor got 4 years in federal prison. Amanda got 6. Denise took a plea deal and received 15 months in a federal halfway house, plus 5 years of supervised release. The court ordered restitution to be paid to the tenants who had been harassed, and to me for legal costs and damages, and the fraudulent addendum vacated. Permanently expunged from the county records. The following month I held a small ceremony, nothing big, just a few neighbors, some folding chairs, and a notary from the county clerk's office. We signed a new declaration that made it officially impossible for any HOA to be formed within Meadowbrook Ridge without the full and public consent of every property owner. I made copies for each tenant, laminated. I also had brass plaques installed on the street corners. Clean, simple, and mounted on concrete footings anchored 3 feet deep. Private road owned and maintained by Ridgeview Properties LLC. No HOA governance authorized trespassers will be prosecuted. I watched one of the remaining former board members walk past it a few days later. He didn't say a word, just kept his head down and walked faster. That's when I knew it was over. No more fake meetings. No more clipboard signatures. No more threats disguised as neighborly concern. The street was quiet again. For the first time in months, people waved without hesitation. Kids rode their bikes without being stopped for decorative violations. One of my tenants, a retired mechanic, started a weekend car club in his driveway. No one said a word because they finally understood you don't get to fake power. Not here, not in Meadowbrook Ridge, not on my